This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
Your strategy has always been to help people enjoy great coffee and help producers produce better coffee and have a good return as well, and help cafe owners grow. That doesn't change. And so if anything, it just helps you do more of that at a larger scale.
Campos is one of the best known coffee brands in Australia, supplying its beans to around 700 cafes across the country. It was founded in Sydney in 2002. It has a flagship store in Newtown and also in Queensland, and has recently come to the city that considers itself the coffee capital of Australia and possibly the world. That's Melbourne, my hometown. So a flagship store has recently opened in Chapel Street. Our guest today is John Ronchi. He's the commercial director of Campos. And something interesting about the company is that it was acquired by Dutch company JDE Peet in 2021. So this is a coffee story. This is a business story. This is a story about cafe culture in Australia as well. John, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Thanks for having me, Dani.
Tell us about your role at Campos and where the company's placed at the moment.
Yeah, sure. I guess I've been around in the business since almost the beginning, I guess. I just celebrated my 15th year anniversary in the business, and the business has been around about 20. So I guess I've been here from the start and started in the business as a customer of Campos, not long after Will had founded it, and then moved into becoming more involved in opening the operation in Queensland or the Territory, and went through this process of growth with, along with the business. So, I guess I've always had this methodology of just wanting everyone to love great coffee as much as we do. And that's been the backbone of, I guess, our strategy, in regardless of how we've progressed through the years or what sort of channels we've moved into. We just wanted to make great coffee accessible to everyone, and certainly move, back into Melbourne. We've been in Melbourne, in Victoria for quite a few years, but like a lot of businesses, I think COVID got the better of us in a few ways, and at least it expired just before COVID, and for our roastery and our cafe. So unfortunately, with all the borders shut, we weren't able to come down and find new locations, and with everything freeing up again, it gave us the opportunity to really relaunch and open our new warehouse in Yarraville, and then obviously our new flagship store on Chapel Street, which is a great place to be too.
Yeah, well, I guess Chapel Street itself is undergoing a little bit of a renaissance. It certainly had tricky times, still a lot of empty shops, but that South Yarra end, there is a lot of development, certainly a lot of residential. So hopefully it'll be a huge success for you guys. I think, the Campos story is almost one of the great origin stories of Next Wave Coffee in Australia. Will in the late 90s famously tried a cup of coffee that changed his life, and then was one of the people that I suppose kicked off the whole specialty coffee industry in Australia. You've been with the company for a while. I mean, what sort of changes have you seen in the way that Australians approach coffee?
Oh, I'm very proud to tell everyone that will listen, particularly anyone when I travel internationally, that Australia is at the forefront of coffee. And I'm half Italian, so that can be a challenging conversation when I go to Italy and tell them that, they're so far behind that they really need to catch up. But, I think, it changes almost monthly, Dani. There's just so much stuff happening all the time. And I think that's what has kept me in the coffee industry for so long is that it's just always interesting. There's always new things. It's a really young industry, I find. So as I've gotten much older, I'm constantly surrounded by younger people that keep me young, and they're always enthusiastic and probably over caffeinated, but that's good too. And so, even over the last 10 years, I mean, the advancement in equipment, particularly in cafes, which is kind of my background. So as a cafe owner, and I guess I'm still a cafe owner now, I'm very interested in, increasing increasing consistency, quality, the traceability that's happened around coffee. I remember when, I first started, 15 years ago, and we were, sourcing coffee. Most coffee was coming through brokers, and we were always like, oh, gee, I wish I could get that again, but we didn't know where. And then all of a sudden, everyone started going on origin trips and formulating relationships. And some of those relationships that we, have developed with producers 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we still have today. It's quite phenomenal. We've seen their kids grow up, and now the kids are running the farm. And so that's, I think, the thing that just is really great about coffee. It's constantly evolving, it's constantly improving, and it's just a great industry to be in.
I mean, it's also an industry that has, a lot of problems in terms of the way the economics of the industry is structured, where coffee is traded as a commodity, and a lot of farmers are price takers, and, the supply chain is very opaque and gets very murky. What does Campos do to ensure that your suppliers do all right out of the work that they do?
Yeah, sure. Well, essentially all our coffee is fully traceable. So in some cases, depending on the origin, it's without sort of getting into the weeds of it too much. Some particular countries, say, for example, Ethiopia, you need to generally go through an exchange, but it doesn't mean it can't be traceable. So you can still find, and deal directly with the farmer that you're wanting to work with. And so we've had various projects through the years, and it really depends a lot on what the producer needs. So I guess the way that I explain this a bit, if you're a particularly small roaster, small business, you may want to go along the path of choosing certified coffees, whether that be Rainforest Alliance or Fair Trade or Utes. Sometimes really big businesses end up going down that path too, because it's much easier to ensure there's some sort of traceability and certification. And when you kind of sit in the middle with businesses like us, we have the ability and the resource to actually go to origin a lot more. So we visit, prior to COVID, and now starting again this year, which everyone's very excited about, visit our producers, once or twice a year, to check in on projects that we may have with them, whether it be based on quality, whether it be environmental, whether it be social. So each particular group that we work with, and like I was saying, some of them have been for years and years, we have certain projects that are ongoing with them. And some of them, for example, from a social aspect, might be quite developed, but now they're moving into wanting to focus more on environmental sustainability, or even improving quality even further. So the thing to remember with coffee producers is that they have coffee that ranges from really what you might call low-grade commodity right through to a very high-end specialty. So each farm will have, just like any sort of organic product, commodity, there's different ranges of quality. And so all of that will get sold. The real demand, though, and obviously where there's a lot more financial gain for them, is on the specialty end. And there's becoming a lot more demand for specialty coffee, which is great, but the supply is not keeping up. So that sort of tends to push prices up as well for them. So the story that I see over the years, particularly, for example, with Campos, our involvement in the Cup of Excellence program, which is a great program that rewards producers for producing exceptional coffee. One particular farm might win that award and get in the top 10, top 20 of that particular country, and it's completely transformative for that family and for that farm or for that cooperative. And so what happens is the farms and cooperatives around that see that happening and go, well, actually, there's an opportunity for us to move out of that process of, to your point, just being price takers. Maybe we need to look at doing that as well. And so word of mouth, travels, and they go, well, actually, this particular farm or cooperative is selling all their coffee already to these, handful of roasters. So they don't have any more capacity. So when new people arrive or new potential buyers arrive, they're told, look, there's a cooperative down the road or there's a mill down the road that's doing similar things. Why don't you go and talk to them? And then that journey starts for them and they come out of that commodity cycle and into the specialty world where it's a lot more financially viable for them.
Yeah, it's amazing to be able to incentivise that improvement in quality and really interesting. I mean, it is hard, I think, in Australia to feel connected to these farms, and companies such as yourself and others do a good job of telling those stories. But I think to think that me wanting a better coffee or becoming more interested in coffee, that it could lead to these actual changes, whether it's in Africa or in South America, wherever it is. I think it's worth trying to keep in mind, because it's not made up, is it?
No, it's not. And you can see, as a consumer, you can start to see that change happen. I mean, for those people that sort of were going to independent cafes 10 years ago, the best you would get maybe in a cafe was they might have a Colombian, Excelsior single origin. And if you were to ask the barista or ask someone where that was from, they'd probably shrug their shoulders and go, oh, Colombia. And that was the best that they would be able to get. Whereas now, you're seeing, we're an example of, there's lots of specialty roasters around that are doing it. You can see the photo of the farmer and the story of the farm and where it's grown, the varietal, and all this information that was never accessible to people before. And I guess I'm very fortunate that I've gotten to see it firsthand, to be able to go back to those producers and show them the cards and show them photos and videos in cafes where people, their face is on the card, and the people, they get to see consumers actually try their product and know it's come from them and from their hard work, rather than before just getting put into a generic bag and no one really knowing where it's come from. So that would probably be my comment, was if you want to support that type of growth in the industry, is support those businesses where they're able to tell you where the coffee's from and show you and demonstrate it. That's a really good start.
What's a farm or a producer that you just love visiting and where you've seen a transformation over the years?
Oh, gee. I guess I've been very lucky because I've been to lots, but particularly probably one of my most memorable was my trips to Ethiopia, most probably because how remote some of the farms are, and particularly going and visiting the Mordekov is one of the farms we bought from there, and Haile Selassie is the owner, who's been around for years and years, and seeing the farm transform over the years. And honestly, Danny, I could probably, pretty much every place we've touched, as you get the opportunity to go back and visit, you see them even from the point of view of, again, that commercial viability of them. They start out with maybe 10 drying beds, and now they've got 20, and now they've got 30, and then you're turning up to visit these farms, and there's other specialty roasters from around the world that are now also buying from them, and you all had this kind of connection of really wanting to be able to give people great coffee and be able to help these producers produce great coffee, which financially is like light and day for them. It really is. Being able to move out of that commodity cycle, and having people come and also with the wealth of knowledge, right, that comes with that. So the feedback, and they love the feedback too, directly from consumers, going, people are loving this particular coffee that you produce, and the way that, and not just the actual green coffee, the raw product, but how they've processed it too, which is really important in the coffee world. There's all various different processing methods, which, again, we could probably spend another hour talking about how processing methods in coffee have changed over the last 10, 15 years. But even that in itself has been quite transformative for a lot of producers and for the coffee industry in getting it much more aligned and probably more respected in the way that the wine industry has become, where you're getting the same sort of characteristics, if not more so, from coffee than you do from wine, both based on the origin or the terroir, but also from the way that it's processed.
We see perhaps a picture of a coffee farmer on a card in a cafe, but I think just spend a minute giving us a picture of this farm. Like, is it like a rough road to get in? Is it on a hill? Like, is it really hot? Like, what does it feel like? What does it smell like?
All of the above. It's normally, or say, for example, I'll use Ethiopia as the example. You fly into Addis, and then it's normally a 2-day drive. At least a 1 or 2 day drive out of Addis. Very, extremely remote, hard to get to. Plenty of photos of all of us outside the 4-wheel drive pushing the vehicle out of mud to try and get to. That's just to get to the farm, and they really vary. Some farms might be only a couple of hectares. It depends if it's a part of a cooperative, so there might be a whole lot of small lot holders. Some are slightly larger when you go to countries like Colombia or Brazil. Brazil's quite advanced from an agronomy point of view, so much more organised and structured, and a lot more mechanised harvesting. So they really vary, but the thing that's a constant is everyone's really proud of what they're producing and want to produce, even better product, because also too, they need to make a living, like a cafe owner or anyone else. So they want to be able to produce better coffee to be able to sell it at a higher price. And whether that be to help send their kids to school or just to expand to be able to produce more of it. So you have normally they're family run. The people that we buy from generally are all family-run businesses. So the family lives on site, and you have normally a small mill nearby as well, but they're taking their coffee too. So these are very incredibly picturesque places quite often, high altitude. So really nice cool sort of climate. Weather places, and with lots of surrounded by rainforest, and so they're sometimes it's sort of I guess within the coffee world, something, you've seen one coffee tree, you've seen them all, but it's not really the case, because every farm, every location is different. Sometimes they just have this one thing with their mill that's a little bit different than someone else is doing, or, the way that they're pruning trees is slightly different, or they're trialling something new, which always makes it really interesting.
Fantastic. So, Campos is a well-established company. I reckon you guys would have had a few bigger businesses sniffing around over the years looking to acquire. And that finally did happen in 2021. JDE Peet acquired the company. They're a massive, like $20 billion company based in Holland. They own Moccona, among other big brands. I mean, I'd love you to talk about why Will, or you guys, the directors, decided that this was the right move to make, and what it's meant for Campos.
Yeah, so I was a previous owner, shareholder director as well before the acquisition, and you're right. Over the years, people came knocking, and it's like any business. People, I guess it's probably relevant for a lot of people when a roaster or a bigger business gets purchased. But the same thing happens in cafes. When I was in the cafe world, owning cafes, people come along and want to buy you. So it's probably a pretty normal part of life, is buying and selling a business. And in the case with us, we were always determined that if the time was right, and the time was getting right with the group of directors that we had, if we were going to sell, we wanted it to be sold to someone who would respect what we'd done. And for us, having a business like JDE Peet's, that's the world's biggest pure play coffee company, coffee and tea, but mostly coffee, come to us, was quite compelling, because we knew that they knew about coffee. And the other thing it would open to us is a world of opportunity in other categories, and particularly in technology. I guess in a way that we would really supercharge what we wanted to do as well. So, these things take time, lots of conversations, lots of assurances, and that was part of the model for the acquisition, which was quite new to them, which was very light touch or pretty much non-integration at all. It was very much a case of, Campos gets acquired, but then how does the JDE business support Campos in continuing to do what it's doing? And one of the exciting things for me personally and for us at Campos was now we're talking to colleagues at Stumptown and Intelligentsia and Peet's in the US, who we've always had a lot of alignment, particularly Stumptown. We've been big fanboys of them for a long time, and so there's a lot of alignment in a lot of some of the US specialty brands, as there is in Australia, and particularly Stumptown and Campos kind of came onto the scene at a similar sort of time. We always ran into them at Origin. There's one particular producer in Colombia, actually, that they only sell their coffee to us and Stumptown. And so for us to be able to get some insight into the US market and some of the new product development that they're working on to be able to help us has been really, insightful. And so we're talking to them regularly. So there's a lot of benefits for the Campos business in just having that those insights that we didn't have before. For example, whether it be in Nespresso compatible capsules. I mean, JDE Peet's manufacturer. They also have Locke capsules, which is one of the biggest capsule brands in the world, and so for us to be able to lean into that has been great as well, to really be able to improve the consistency and the quality of our products.
That's so interesting. I think people, when they hear about scale and about multinationals, they, whether they continue to trust that company or, I guess when you've got this idea of specialty coffee as this real hand-to-hand thing where you're connected, you think about small business, think about relationships. So how do you protect that when you become part of this massive machine?
Sure. And we still have the agility to be able to maintain everything we were before. I mean, there's really, no change in the way we operate. We still buy coffee the same way. We still operate the same way. What it's done is more help us on the back end with certain things. And, it's, for example, we were on the road to implementing a new CRM system to be able to, take care of our cafe customers much better. We were able to do that much quicker by utilising their relationship. That's where the advantage comes from. As far as what people may see as, potential challenges around those sorts of things, certainly doesn't, and hasn't applied to us because it's very much business as usual. And we're already, in respective terms to other players in Australia, probably a larger player before the acquisition. And one of the things that, we used to say and continue to say is, if the bigger you are in a lot of ways, the more good you can do too. So if your strategy has always been to help people enjoy great coffee and help producers produce better coffee and have a good return as well, and help cafe owners grow, that doesn't change. And so, if anything, it just helps you do more of that at a larger scale.
And from the other side, John, like from perhaps a cafe owner who just, it's their first business, they're thinking about how they scale or how they scale up and looking to perhaps sell their business or become part of a larger group. What would you say they should be looking at in terms of preparing themselves and their business for that next step? You
definitely need to have an exit plan when you start. that was the biggest thing I learnt from opening my first cafe. I didn't have it, and I opened, and the excitement of opening, and had never really put any thought into, is this a long-term venture? Is this I was fortunate that it was a sort of a rundown cafe that had pretty much closed down, and I was able to get it really cheap and with the help of friends and family, and a maxed out credit card, built it up, and and then, but a few years in, sort of went to, well, what am I doing? Is this long term or not? And I think that's really the thing that I always start out with talking to people when they're looking at first starting something is, what's the intent? Is it, and it's fine. It could be any of the above. It could be, actually, I want to have this business forever. It could be, I only want to build it up for 2 or 3 years and sell it and move it on to something else. And that's, or I want to franchise and have multiple sites. Until you can answer that question, it becomes very hard to work out what your long-term strategy is and where you're going to invest your capital, what sort of people you're going to hire, what sort of layout do you need, and it can be a bit challenging. The first one, most people don't. It's sort of their second and third one that they move on to. They realise that they need to kind of have that plan. And sometimes things change too. You think you're only going to have one, and then people come in, and before you know it, you have 2 or 3. But it's really having that understanding, and also having an understanding of the hospitality business, having had some exposure to it. The successful businesses that I've always seen are started by people that have some exposure previously, because it's tough going. It can be a very rewarding industry to be in, but there's also a lot of hard work. And I think sometimes as a consumer, as a customer, you walk into a cafe or a restaurant and you see the owner there and they're all smiling and happy. You're not seeing them out the back stressing out because people haven't turned up and something broke down and they've got all these bills. That's because they're a really good operator, and they make you feel comfortable and at home, and they make sure you're looked after. And that's a real challenge of owning a hospitality business, is being able to maintain that, but also make sure that you keep an income going and keep the business running and make people feel happy at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we love talking about on this podcast, is that whole thing about costs and pricing and creating the magic or the illusion of magic. I mean, how price sensitive do you think Australian customers are to how much they're paying for coffee?
I think I remember, starting out, particularly in my first business, if you would raise coffee prices by 20 cents, people would comment. They were used to giving you a $5 note and getting a certain amount of change back. I think, everyone, given the current climate, just the constant discussion around inflation, interest rates, it's sort of got a lot of heightened attention, which is fair enough in pretty much any industry, I guess. The thing that I think is good about it is that we're talking about it a lot more, say for people like yourself, whether it be in podcasts or articles or generally in the media, highlighting the fact that, hospitality businesses are entitled to and need to be able to turn a profit as well. And to do that, they need to be able to cost things appropriately. And I have never come across, really, that I can think of a hospitality business that has set out to gorge anyone for pricing. They're doing their best to cover the costs of what may have been previously exorbitant rents, may still be. Hopefully post-COVID there's a little bit of rationalisation on that, but extremely challenging for operators when, they have huge rent costs. Labour costs have continued to rise, but in the sense that, well deserved from an industry that previously has probably had a bad reputation for people being, exploited in some way. That's, a lot more attention being put on that, which normalises things and, again, makes it much more of a viable career opportunity for young people. And then general costs of goods. So I think people are pretty sensitive to it, but at the same time, in the current climate, the customers that I talk to, when in one of our own cafes, one of our own flagships, sure, disappointed if the price goes up, but understanding that in some ways it needs to. And I just hope that governments try and keep a reminder that how important cafes, restaurants and hospitality are to the economy. We employ such a large amount of people per square metre when you think of the average size of a cafe and how many people work in that business. And not only that, but the type of people that work in the business. They're normally young people that are going to be spending a lot of their money. We're massive GST collectors. Everything that we purchase is generally GST free, and we put GST on it. And all our suppliers are generally other small businesses as well. So, I guess I'm biased, but I just think that, hospitality generally is such a vital part of the economy and sometimes doesn't get the attention it deserves from governments with regards to the support that it's needed.
John, what is your coffee of choice?
I'm a piccolo guy in the morning, but I tend to drink a little bit of everything. We in the office we have our office and roastery are the one building, and so when you walk past our reception area, you walk past our cupping and QA room, and we have cupping on several times during the morning. So if I get an opportunity to go down and join that, you generally not consuming lots of coffee, but you're getting it in your system. So that, and then if I ever go out and see customers or, they always want to have a coffee with me as well. So I tend to have a bit of everything. But yeah, piccolo tends to be my go-to.
I love it. Well, so great to get your perspective on all things coffee and, a lot of great words on business and, the hospitality industry more broadly. So, John, really appreciate your expertise and your time in coming and having a chat with us today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.